Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Roy Cross. I work in the British Council's English for Education Systems team in London. And I will be attempting to chair this afternoon's webinar. We're going to start with two introductory speeches, or a few words from my colleague Diana Daste from the British Council in Brazil. Diana is the Director of Education. Over to you, please, Diana.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be opening the International Talks, this series of webinars we've been developing in partnership with FAUBAI. Thanks a lot for that partnership. Thanks for the participation. The series basically responds to our interest on reflecting, documenting, understanding, and positioning internationalization as a key driver for strategic development, quality from higher education institutions, and of course, fostering international partnerships. So we're very much linked, and we pretty much also expect to see from our talk today everything around building capacities, having key reflections, and of course, having key instruments to advance in this path of becoming more international, more robust, and more strategic around internationalization processes. So in the first series, for those of you who missed it, in the first of our reflections, it was around thinking, internationalization, understanding key indicators, key milestones. The second one, it was about operating internationalization. How do we work together? You know, key stakeholders and key partnerships. This one, we're now zooming into a specific area, very dear to us, language policy and internationalization. I'm not going to bring a spoiler into the webinar today, but we are indeed very happy to launch the publication, Framing English Language Applied Research, which brings the result of 8 funded projects from UK and Brazil, developed in collaboration in 2018 and 2019, reflecting specifically on how to become more strategic, how these partnerships operate, where are the key drivers around the design of language policies, how to bring and engage different stakeholders. And there was also a chapter also in that publication reflecting on teacher training and how are we going to address the challenges around better professional and better language proficiency on basic education and the school system. So that said, I'm not going to spoil or extend very much, but I do want to thank our partners and colleagues from FAUBAI and the British Council, so Rene, Kyria, and Roy, all of you, Telma, I don't want to miss anyone, but thanks a lot for this partnership. It's been very interesting to observe the evolution of these reflections, to see how the landscape in Brazil is changing and in the world as a whole, and how we're able to think and adapt and recommend in the best means possible capabilities and areas where we can also optimize the drive of these current processes. So thanks a lot. Welcome, and well, looking forward to our webinar today.
Thank you, Diana. Rene, over to you, please. Yeah.
Boa tarde, buenas tardes, good afternoon, good evening, good morning. I am Rene Ziekman, Executive Director of FAUBAI, the Brazilian Association for International Education. On behalf of Professor Maria Leonor Maia, President of FAUBAI, I would like to welcome all participants and to thank very especially the speakers and our moderator, Roy Cross. The Brazilian Association for International Education, FAUBAI, is a non-profit association founded in 1988, 32 years ago, with more than 220 international officers from Brazilian higher education institutions, both public and private ones, aiming to promote the internationalization process in Brazilian higher education. In these pandemic times, FAUBAI has reinvented itself, offering special programs and projects in the new virtual context. In partnership with British Council, FAUBAI has been developing important initiatives, especially in the last decade. An online platform of courses in English and other foreign languages offered by more than 70 Brazilian higher education institutions, which is available at the FAUBAI's website. Several academic events and missions in the UK and in Brazil. The recent project baseline assessment of evaluation of the internationalization of Brazilian higher education institutions, which will be launched next year during the virtual FAUBAI conference 2021. That will happen in the last week of April 2021, dates to be confirmed soon. Please save this period in your agendas for the virtual FAUBAI conference next year. It is with great pleasure that we offer today the third webinar, as Diana mentioned, of the International Talk series in a partnership between FAUBAI and the British Council Brazil. Thanks again for your participation and have a successful webinar. Thanks, gracias, muito obrigada.
Thank you, Renee. Thank you. Carol, I think we're now going to sort of give people a sense of the whole of the series of the talks. Is that right? You've got a slide to show us. So we are here, you've heard about the first two. We're at number 3, language policies and internationalization. And then internationalization and extension is the next area. Next slide, if you can, please, Carol. That's it, good, sorry. Yeah, 4 splendid speakers today. We start with my colleague Anne Veitch, who has spent the last year spending a lot of time on language policy, English medium education, how universities think through the languages that they use. Kyria will then tell us about her work and 6 key principles. Marilyn and Telma will talk about 2 of the projects that are actually included in the publication that we'll talk a little bit about later. So we have 4 splendid talks in prospect. What we would like also is to make sure that we have lots of splendid questions. So please use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask your questions. If they're technical questions, we may well be able to answer them in chat. If they're a bit more philosophical, we'll try our best to answer them when we come to discussion. Let me just check that I've mentioned most of the things. I need to tell you also that at the end, there's going to be a brief evaluation. Everybody says these things are short. This one is actually a short one. 4 very short multiple choice questions, which will help the organizers assess how well this webinar has worked for its audience, whether it's been useful, whether it's been interesting. I've introduced our speakers already. If I can then please, Anne, ask you to start your presentation. Over to you. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Roy. I'm going to look at in this presentation some of the issues and opportunities presented by English medium within language and education policies, and present some of the work British Council have been doing on a global level to define a position on English medium in higher education. I'd like to begin with a couple of short questions and a couple of facts. Next slide. Yeah, perfect. So I'd like to ask you to use the chat box and type your answer, A, B, or C, and we'll see what everyone thinks. How many of the world's international students are learning through English? Do you think it's a quarter, a half, or 3/4? Great, a variety of answers there. Great, I think a lot of you got this right. Over half of international students around the world are learning through English. This is based on a 2013 study, so I imagine the numbers actually increased since then. Next slide, please. In Brazil, according to a 2018 study, what percentage of universities offer English medium programs? Is it 59%, 69%, or 79%? Most of you, I think, are saying 59%. It's actually 79%. This is based on the FAUBAI study, which we did with which was conducted. Obviously, it's 79% of the surveyed institutions, but there was a further 6% considering offering English medium programs. Next slide, please. What percentage of academic publications are published in English globally? Is it 50%, 75%, or 90%? A lot of you, I think, are opting for 75%. It's actually 90%. This is according to a 2013 study, which looked at academic publications over the past century. So from the turn of the 20th century, where about 35% of academic publications were in English, to the end of the century, where over 90% were in English. Exactly, wow. So given these facts, what can we say about English medium in higher education and language policy? The growth in English medium in higher education has been vast and substantial. Macaro, an academic in the field in 2015, likened it to an unstoppable train. We in British Council have expanded on this by likening English medium implementation not just to any train, but a Japanese bullet train, which has left the station and is travelling at pace. The true global scale of growth is difficult to assess as the mapping of English medium provision is patchy. Where it is mapped, there has been huge growth over the last couple of decades, including in Brazil. In Europe, there was a 1,100% increase in English medium master's courses between 2001 and 2014. In Japan, a 2017 study showed that 30% of all higher education courses are offered in English medium. And in China, a 2010 study showed that 132 out of 135 universities offer English medium courses. English, as we've seen, dominates as a language of academic publication. And given this, it's arguably a necessity in higher education as it's needed for access to cutting edge knowledge. English is the language of internationalisation. The introduction of English medium programmes is seen as a way to increase international competitiveness and profile. It's linked to international rankings, increased income. It's becoming an important criterion in staff hiring decisions. The relationship between English medium and internationalisation is complex. English medium is simultaneously a driver, a reaction, and an outcome of internationalisation. English can be a force for good, but it can also be a force for ill. Does the use of English facilitate the internationalisation of higher education or the Englishization of higher education? English can be a common shared or neutral language, enabling the exchange of ideas and people globally. However, internationalization at its best is about developing authentic intercultural learning experiences, not just increasing the interconnectedness of educational processes around the world. At its worst, the dominance of English creates a lack of diversity in language. It leads to domain loss in local and other languages, and can be seen as a tool of post-colonial domination in many parts of the world. Does English medium expand learning or hinder learning? In terms of student learning outcomes, English medium could help in developing language skills alongside content knowledge, but on the other side, English medium can also inhibit the transfer of knowledge from academic or lecturer to student, either because the students or lecturers lack of English language ability, or lecturers might lack the pedagogical skill to teach in an English medium or multilingual environment. Does English expand opportunity or add to inequalities? English medium is often touted as a route to greater opportunity for staff and students, enhancing employability and enhancing social mobility. However, it's generally the rich and advantaged who are able to access these opportunities through English medium. English medium can also be seen to create opportunity for the UK, for UK education. It makes it easier for transnational education to flourish. But conversely, a stronger English medium provision outside of the UK creates competition for the UK sector. Can you click the slide, Carolina? Thank you. Given all of this and the complexities of the issue and British Council's role globally, we decided about 1 year ago that we needed to have a global position or a perspective on English medium and higher education to guide our approach and have a cohesive message. Next slide, please, Carolina. Having a position on English medium and language policy in higher education is both complex and difficult. Within basic education, so primary and secondary education, there's general agreement about the best way to approach language of learning and teaching. And that is that mother tongue-based multilingual education rather than English medium is advantageous to students. International agencies, for example, UNICEF, UNESCO, World Bank, and the British Council have stated positions on language of learning and teaching in basic education, all of which favour mother tongue-based multilingual educational approaches. The same is not the case, however, for language of learning and teaching in higher education. No international agency has a position on what language and education policy should look like or should be. Some of the reasons for this lack of position are the complexity of the issue, the strong political, economic and academic drivers which influence language policy in higher education, the contextual nature of English medium, and the knowledge gap that exists on the benefits and challenges of English medium. Research into English medium on many key questions is inconclusive, and there's insufficient knowledge available to make judgments about English medium in higher education. Next slide, please. So over the last year, we've gone through quite an expansive process to look at English medium in higher education. We began this process by organising what I like to refer to as a meeting of minds with 25 leading English medium instruction academics from a wide range of UK institutions to look at current English medium research, the research landscape, and whether it was possible for British Council to have a global position on English medium in higher education. Following this, we commissioned a feasibility study on what a position might look like and a literature review which would form the evidence base on which we could build a British Council perspective on English medium in higher education. Our literature review is now published under the title of English in Higher Education, English Medium, and it's freely accessible on our website. The position or perspective piece will be published in January, all being well, as part of the same publication. Out of this process, there came another number of other research pieces. We're currently working in partnership with the University of Oxford on a mapping study, a landscape review of English medium provision in 50 eligible ODA countries. This study will be of vital importance both to British Council's work, but also in terms of grounding future EMI research and filling the gap in understanding the scale, the scope and the nature of English medium provision globally. We're also in the process of commissioning a set of case studies for English medium and higher education, which will explore current practice and be used to contextualise our perspective. And we're also set to award a large grant for research into gender and English medium and higher education, specifically the impact on female students, both in terms of opportunities and challenges. Next slide, please, Carolina. So I'll give you a quick overview of our literature review that we've recently conducted into research on English medium and higher education. It's a wide-ranging study and gives an overview of what's currently published in the field. It covers an incredibly wide range of topics, looking at the nature of the phenomena, defining EMI, the growth of EMI, the drivers of EMI, perceived benefits, with a specific focus on internationalisation, the variation of EMI implementation, the range of support structures for students and lecturers, quality assurance of English medium programmes, a reflection on the successes and challenges of English medium and higher education, and the role of multilingualism, translanguaging in English medium programmes. And I'll post the link in the chat after I finish the links on this slide here. Next slide, please. So all of the work that we've done and are doing is resulting in a loose emerging position, perspective, provocation on English medium and higher education, which is intended to help us guide the conversation and allow for a nuanced approach grounded in contextual challenges and need. Above all, our position on English medium is that we promote quality and successful learning outcomes through English medium education. We don't endorse English medium, as this would mean often endorsing poor policy and implementation. We also don't want to encourage the spread of English medium or the Englishization of education. In terms of language, internally within British Council, we started to refer to English medium education rather than English medium instruction. English medium of education was a term coined by Veitch and Smith in 2016. And we feel this better represents our approach and work for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it encapsulates the holistic nature of language and education. English medium is about both teaching and learning. It's not just a one-way street of instruction. We promote holistic language policy, holistic in a number of ways. So holistic and coherent in terms of an education system, so smooth transitions from language of learning and teaching through basic education, so through primary to secondary and into higher education. Holistic in terms of institution, where English plays the role of an academic language of learning and teaching, but also a means of international communication. This acknowledges that a transition to English medium involves all aspects of campus life, from administration to teaching, and there's a need for support structures across the board. Holistic in terms of aspects of an education system, so a need for cohesion in language of curriculum, language of assessment and language of teaching materials. The term English medium education is also linked to an understanding of English as part of a multilingual educational environment, and this is becoming a very important part of our philosophy. The full term coined by Veitch and Smith is English medium education in multilingual university settings. Language and education should embrace multilingualism, and there should be respect for and a place for all languages within internationalisation. Internationalisation should be achieved through languages, not just through English. I was really encouraged to see that conversations around multilingualism within language policy and multilingual pedagogical approaches are beginning to take place in Brazil, at least at an academic level. This afternoon, I was just reading a really interesting paper by Kyria, one of my fellow speakers on this webinar, on internationalization and multilingualism in Brazil and how these might be fostered through different pedagogical approaches, including content and language integrated learning. I'm sure she'll speak more about that later. Policy needs to be driven both top down and bottom up. Most language and education policy is top down. Decisions are made at a high level, but our perspective is that students and academics and wider society need to be listened to and their views need to be responded to within language policy. We would like to promote a contextualized needs-based response to English medium education. Approach to language and education policy should be nuanced. There's no one size fits all. We also encourage the consideration of alternative approaches. For example, if improving students' English language proficiency is an objective, English as a subject or content and language integrated learning is perhaps a better way to address this rather than English medium. We also strongly encourage complementary support structures for both students and staff, so staff as in lecturers and administrative staff within the university, if they're operating in English medium environments. I'm going to stop talking now and hand back to Roy, but before I do, I'd like to thank our partners, FAUBAI, for their support in hosting this event. Thanks, Roy.
Thank you very much, Anne. We were talking the other day about how there is quite a lot of research, but the only people that read the research at present are the researchers. And there's a challenge for us all, I think, in helping the rectors, the principals of universities to read a bit more of the research that is being produced. That's a joint responsibility, I'm pretty sure. Kyria Finardi is a professor in the Department of Languages, Culture and Education at the Espírito Santo, which is the Holy Spirit, I guess, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And also a coordinator of the Ibero-America Applied Linguistics Association. Kyria, please, over to you now. Yeah.
Thanks, Roy. Kara, can you, yes, please, thank you. So my role today was to talk a little bit about language policies for internationalization in a way as to assist and help mainly people involved with the International Relations Office in higher education to deal with this very complicated issue, as you can see from Anne's talk. And I'm very glad that Anne talked before me, because you can see from her panorama of the use of English, the many advantages and also challenges for the use of English within multilingualism and in higher education, so as to foster more inclusive and multilingual approaches to internationalization. And so as to help international officers and also people who are interested in fostering multilingual approaches to higher education. FAUBAI, very aware of the very intricate and complex task of designing language policies, supported the creation of a working group made up of experts, mainly from International Relations Office and from the field of language policies and multilingualism, so as to try to help guide or give some guidelines for this very difficult task of designing language policies for institutions. Next slide, please, Carol. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of two of the main or two of the most important tasks that this working group composed of Telma Gimenez, Simone Sarmento, Renata Arcanjo, and me. We worked, the working group has other components, but these people that I mentioned, one of whom is with us today, Telma, we were involved not only in the design of some guidelines for the elaboration of institutional language policies, but also in the elaboration of a survey to verify the use of other languages, like Anne said, not only English as a medium of education or instruction, but other languages as a medium of education and instruction in Brazil. And you can assess this material in the link to FAUBAI and also the British Council for the EMI guide. And though the name of the guide is EMI, English as a medium of instruction, you're going to find the offer of other courses taught in other languages apart from English. And not only foreign languages, but also in Portuguese as a foreign language in these institutions, which very often is neglected, and a very important offer and role for the offer of Portuguese as a foreign language to boost internationalization. Next slide, please. But today I'm not going to focus on the EMI guide. It is available online. You can all access and check. Today I decided to focus a little bit on the this document that you can see. It was published in Portuguese. It's available in the FAUBAI site. These are the guidelines for the design and implementation of institutional language policies. And the reason why we worked on this document is because we were aware of the difficulties included in this design of language policies, and not only language policies, but for a specific purpose, that is for internationalization. Next, please, Carol. This document, it has 11 parts, but today I'm going to focus only on the 7 first ones. So I'm not going to go into the conclusion, further reading and references. You can all access that online in the site. So I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the 7 first parts, and perhaps give some questions for reflection for international offices to think about. Next, please, Carol. So the first one, the introduction, or the reason why this document was elaborated by this special working group, this language policy working group of FAUBAI, is that the idea was for this document to serve as a guideline to subsidize International Relations Office, raising awareness of the difficulty and important role of languages in the internationalization process. And like Anne said, internationalization is made through the use of languages, not only English. And very often we see it equated as only the use of English. And this is something very difficult. And very challenging for institutions to sort of gauge, what is the right balance and how to deal with the use of multiple languages in this context. So the idea of the document was to give guiding questions and points for reflection especially for International Relations Office in higher education institutions. Next, please. The concept of internationalization used to guide the elaboration of this document was that it is a motivated process of integrated and international, intercultural, or global dimension in the objectives, functions, and actions of higher education, so as to improve teaching and research in the university community to provide significant contributions to society. I think that this year with the pandemic, more than ever, we saw the importance of giving these contributions and answers to society, and how universities dealt with this global problem, coming together to try to find solutions. Next, please. So a very important question is, what is language policy? And a Swiss applied linguist and economist, to François Gran, he says that everywhere where there is more than one language being used, there is bound to be problems and conflict. And so as to disentangle and sort of try to guide the use of languages in a peaceful way in a certain environment, language policies are required. And so the view of language policies that we adopt in the formulation of this document, and so as to guide the institutions, is the development of a policy for the selection and use of certain languages in the context of higher education focused on internationalization. Next, please. So that brings us to a very important question. What languages are part of internationalization? And I'm very glad Anne has already answered that question. Even though more than 90% of publications are in English, and more than, let me see if I got my notes right, 70%, that is almost 80% of courses in Brazil are offered in English. And more than half of the world's higher education students are having classes in EMI. We know that there are other possibilities, and if you care to look at the site and the link for the EMI guide, you're going to see that even in Brazil, though we have almost 80% of courses offered in English, there are other offers and other options and other languages as well. And I very much agree with Anne that internationalization, though it is mainly carried out in English, it has to be done with the use of other languages. And so in higher education institutions, the definition of language policies proves to be a very important management practice. It specifies the internationalization model view to be adopted, as well as its priorities, objectives, goals, establishing the languages that can be used as mediators of these internationalization practices, and not only mediators, but also the type of relations and voices that are going to be highlighted in this process. Next, please. I'd like to focus, and I think a very important contribution of this document is in terms of helping international relations officers and language division officers to think about how to orient the use of languages for internationalization in these 6 dimensions. That is, which languages can be used for academic admission, which languages should be taught in the institution, which languages should be used as a medium of instruction, or as Anne said, as a medium of education, which languages should be used in the administration, which ones should be used in communication, both internal and external, and finally, which languages should be used for research, output, academic production, socialization, exams, etc. Next, please. So in thinking about how to elaborate a language policy, an institutional language policy for internationalization, one thing that is very important for stakeholders is to bear in mind that the action plan for the institutional language policy has to carefully consider governance structure and document structure, to see whether it is, in the case of document structure, for example, to see if it is aligned and accountable to the general plan development, institutional development plan, PDI. And in the case of governance, who are the stakeholders and actors that are going to be part of the process of elaborating, assessing, evaluating, and also being accountable to in terms of the institutional language policy. Next, please. So as to help institutions, higher education institutions, to think about that, this document offers some guiding questions and goals as a form of orientation, considering that language policies must be reflected in actions aimed at internationalization of higher education. We're not talking about language policies in general, but a more specific type of language policy. And this document suggests some guiding, the document, FAUBAI's document suggests some guiding questions and principles to assist International Relations Office, of course, in the sense of guiding, not prescribing. And we say that because we know that each institution and context must, know and respect its own context and articulate the different levels and players and importance given to different languages and sectors within the institution. Next, please. So one example, Goal 1, for example, if Goal 1 was, for instance, to create, expand, and align the spectrum of foreign languages considered in language policies for internationalization of higher education institutions in those 6 dimensions that we mentioned, for example, language of admission, languages taught, languages used as a medium of instruction, languages used in administration, for communication, and also for output production. Next, please. If this was the goal, then some guiding questions, this is just a suggestion, some guiding questions might be, for example, how can languages be part of the academic admission process? And here we're talking about undergraduate, graduate, extension, etc. What types of tests, exams will be used and formally recognized or not by the different sectors of the institution? What languages can be offered to the institution and with what kind of institutional support? How can we give, or how can institutions give access to the academic community? How can international students and international academics in the institutions be supported, assisted, and accompanied when necessary? What kind of Portuguese as a foreign language actions are offered at the institution? Which tests, exams are chosen to assess the proficiency level of Portuguese as a foreign language students, international students? And how will this test, or SAPEBRAS, which is the Brazilian official Portuguese as a foreign language test, be used in relation to different agreements with countries and with those with which we have bilateral agreements? How can the community have access to courses broadcast in other languages? How does the international community have access to this information? Next, please. If, on the other hand, our goal was, for instance, define and provide the operating conditions for the planned actions, then next, some questions would be, which teachers will be involved in these courses? How many teachers specialized in languages are there in the institution? Are there guidelines for initial and continuing teacher training? What kind of articulation can be made with the offers already in place at the institution? How can they be integrated in terms of, the institutional language center, the nucleus, extension programs, etc.? What kind of scholarships can the institution offer for teachers in training and for coordinator advisors working specifically with these courses? What stimulus will be given to this participation? Perhaps not in the form of a scholarship, but in the form of another credit acknowledgements, for example. What appreciation can be given to this kind of professional? Because very often what happens is that teachers and professors teaching English through the medium of other languages, they don't have any acknowledgement or credit in the institution, so they end up working double without being recognized or valued for that. And how will recognition be given to activities carried out in other languages, and not only for teachers, but researchers, students, etc. Next, please. Other questions for the same goal, number 2. In what modalities will the courses be offered? If they're offered in the distance learning modality, what operational support will the distance learning sector of the university or institution provide? What kind of physical space will be allocated for these actions? And I think now it is very important for us to think about technical issues as well, especially when physical academic mobility has been disrupted by the pandemic, for example. How can we have support to have other approaches such as COIL, collaborative online international learning, virtual exchanges, etc.? What technical and operational support can the institution give to allow the community to access these types of offers? How will the academic community be leveled, assessed, evaluated, accompanied? What instruments will be used for each language? Is it viable for the institution to acquire these tests, instruments, books? Are they free of charge for the community? What proficiency tests can be used considering the limitations of access, not only to tests, but also to application centers in the cases of tests that require special labs, for example, to have to evaluate the 4 skills: speaking, writing, listening, and reading. Next, please. Go 3. How can if the institution wants to ensure the long-term sustainability of the planned actions, next please. Some questions might be, what indicators will allow higher education institutions to evaluate the results obtained to ensure maintenance of the proposed actions? Which sector will be responsible for designing such indicators? How often will the results be evaluated, and how will the governance deal with the language policy? How will the promotion and logistical and structural support be of these actions be guaranteed? Next, please. So I hope these questions, bullet points and items that I brought from this document, elaborated by these 5 very special, very specialized and special people, Telma, Simone, Renata, René, and I, will help higher education institutions, especially in the international office, to think about this very challenging topic of designing, maintaining, and assessing language policies for internationalization. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kyria. You said it there at the end. We need to think about this. It's not simple. It's not something we do simply because it makes us money, especially if it's meant to improve learning outcomes and teaching. Thank you very much. Yeah. We'll move on now to Marilyn. Marilyn Martin-Jones from the School of Education at the University of Birmingham. And Marilyn's going to tell us about work she did with Brazilian colleagues on what she's called the changing language and literacy landscapes of Brazilian universities. Over to you, Marilyn, please. Yeah.
Okay, boa tarde. And many thanks to the British Council and to FAUBAI for inviting me to contribute to this event on behalf of my colleagues. And since I know just a few of those who are participating in this webinar in Brazil, the warmest of lockdown wishes to you. Okay, so the title, as you can see, of the project was The Changing Language and Literacy Landscapes of Brazilian Universities, English in Policy, Development and Practice. Can we go to the next slide, please, Carolina? There were 8 of us in this research team, 5 Brazilians and 3 British researchers, and the project was funded by the British Council and with additional funding from other sources such as the University of Birmingham, as part of the Birmingham, Brazil forum that we have. Next slide, please. This was a small-scale research project that lasted for 10 months from the 1st of December 2018. The project combined 2 fields of ethnographic research and theory building in applied linguistics, research on language policy and on academic literacies. The research sites were 2 federal universities in Brazil, and our research focus was on language policy making as a process and on academic literacy practices online and offline, which is the first time that these 2 fields of research have been combined. So following the research shift in language policy to the ethnographic approaches, we approached policy making as a multifaceted institutional process involving policy creation and the production of policy documents, and then policy implementation by different social actors, and ultimately policy appropriation, that is the translation of policy into practice in different ways by different social actors. And this approach to policy making makes it possible to take account of bottom-up initiatives as well as top-down processes of institutional change. And at the same time, following the well-established tradition of ethnographic research on literacy, we approach literacy as a social practice, as a form of social action. In the 21st century, it's no longer possible to do much research into language and social life in institutional contexts without taking account of reading, writing, and the uses of texts, and talk about them. Institutions like universities are textually mediated worlds in the profoundest sense. So the research participants in our study were 18 academics in different disciplines who were working on different institutional levels. Some were working at senior management level and others at the level of postgraduate programs and research centers. Our research methodology was as follows. The data collection included interviews, observations and events relating to internationalization, the taking of field notes, and a final forum for dialogue with research participants. We conducted 9 policy-related interviews, mostly with senior management, and 9 life history interviews and techno-linguistic interviews with individual academics focusing on their language and literacy trajectories. And the data analysis has included thematic analysis, discourse analysis, and narrative analysis. Next slide, please. Okay, now a brief overview of our research findings. Following the award of Capis Print funding to both universities in our study, broad institutional strategies had been adopted, and both had created university-wide fora for debate about internationalization, and both had developed forms of support for academics wishing to publish in English. However, the complexity of the process of language policy making was revealed in the themes and issues that emerged in our interviews and in other data that we gathered. I will highlight some of these themes and issues here, taking account of 3 dimensions of academic life: research, teaching and learning, and administration. First, our research-related findings. There was considerable diversity in knowledge-building practices across disciplines, and hence in the language and literacy practices of the academics in those disciplines. English was used much more often in the conduct of research in science, engineering, and computing. There were different ways of building knowledge across disciplines, for example, in laboratories or libraries, and different ways of writing about research with multiple or single authorship. And of course, there are different styles and genres of writing across disciplines, and different kinds of texts were being produced with or without multimodality involving images, diagrams, and figures like the ones in some of our PowerPoints. There were also diverse views and approaches across disciplines with regard to publishing in English as well as Portuguese. There was general concern about the double load imposed upon Brazilian academics. However, academics in some of the science disciplines appeared to be rather accustomed to using English in academic life. And the normalization of the use of English in presenting research in these fields was clearly much more advanced. As one physicist we interviewed put it, all the literature is in English. In contrast, some of the academics in the humanities and in social science questioned the privileging of English in publications, especially amongst those who focused on topics related to research in Latin America. And in doing so, they emphasized the role that language plays in the humanities and in the social sciences in the actual creation and dissemination of knowledge. Digital resources and multilingual literacies played an absolutely central role in the lives, of the research lives of the participants. Mobile technologies were part and parcel of the lives of those participating. Their smartphones, iPads, and laptops were brought into work and taken home again, enabling their digital literacy practices to cross the boundaries between home and the workplace. Different digital tools and different writing technologies were used for different kinds of research activities. So email, WhatsApp, Zoom, and Skype were used for participation in international networks. For conference organization, web pages were created and use was made of email and WhatsApp. For research collaboration and joint authorship and editing, Google Drive and Dropbox were employed. And for accessing intellectual resources, Cielo was used along with other kinds of internet-based resources. And all the participants had created a personal profile on the Brazilian scholars platform called Lattes. 2 of them had also made use of blogs and social media such as Twitter and Facebook to disseminate their research. And finally, one other key issue arose on several occasions in our interviewing, and this related to the differential positioning of established researchers and early careers and doctoral researchers within the post-2017 research environment created by Capes Print. Within this environment, those who had already established international networks and who had been publishing in international journals for some time were really favorably positioned vis-a-vis their younger colleagues. I could go into more detail, but time does not allow that. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, our findings relating to teaching and learning, here's some examples. One of the universities in our study had a coordinator for English medium education who was based in the International Relations Office. In this university, they'd also taken a policy initiative by appointing a language teaching fellow on a short-term basis using external funding. His role was to support academic staff wishing to teach through the medium of English. About 90 members of staff were participating in this quite well-publicized top-down policy initiative. But the people in the International Relations Office still face considerable challenges in building an overall picture of the nature and scope of pedagogic practices across the disciplines. In the other universities, some academic staff were involved in international collaboration around teaching and doctoral supervision along the sort of the COIL model that Kyria told us about. And they were using digital resources such as Zoom to do this. These collaborations built on previously established research links and were primarily bottom-up initiatives. Language provision for inward mobility, that is for the teaching of Portuguese as a second language, additional language or foreign language, to international students and staff, was already well established and drew on considerable expertise in both universities. And language provision for outward mobility, for example, in English, mostly for students, was diverse, and sources of funding differed, with some being short-term. This provision had continued despite the end of Science Without Borders scheme, and it was running alongside provision for English as an English for academic purposes. Next slide, please. Now, our findings relating to administration. Academics in research centers and institutes were assisting administrative staff with multilingual literacies and the use of digital tools, thereby increasing their own quite considerable workloads. It included a whole range of things like pairing web pages and translating flight details for correspondence with the international scholars. Some of these examples were given to us in an interview with the administrator of an advanced research institute, and he said he expressed despair at having to deal with this as well as all the other work he had to do. Likewise, academics organizing Capes funded summer and winter schools involving international scholars had heavy workloads due to a lack of administrative staff with multilingual literacies and appropriate digital tools. And last but not least, a number of academics in senior positions made reference to the challenges and costs involved in creating and managing multilingual web pages representing their university. However, this was seen as a key means of opening a window on the university, uma janela in inglés, as one prorector put it. Next slide, please. Finally, I turn to our implications for policymaking, although I'm sure you've already anticipated these after hearing about some of our findings. As one former Director of International Relations put it during our final Forum for Dialogue, it's not possible to have a single overarching language policy for a university. A much more focused strategy for policymaking is needed, one that acknowledges some of the themes and issues that I have listed here. So to sum up, these are the differences across disciplines and ways of writing and using and producing texts and building knowledge, and different ways of using English and other languages. contemporary trends in the use of different digital resources, writing writing tools and technologies, and multilingual resources in both research and teaching. Far-reaching changes are taking place in university life, especially with the reliance this year on online resources. Then there's the need to provide support for early career and doctoral researchers with respect to language learning and mobility, and also opportunities to promote their own research. There's also a need to develop a fuller picture of the nature and scope of English medium education across disciplines, and the need to build research collaboration in this area. And Telma will elaborate on this really important point. And also there's a need to develop language resources and digital capabilities amongst administrative staff. And there's also, as we've seen, the need to invest in the representation of the university online and in the development and upkeep of multilingual websites. And last but not least, there's clearly a need for research capacity building in the field of language policy making in higher education in Brazil. This is an area of research methodology that interests us enormously. So next slide. This is a rather rapid list-like overview of the detailed research that we carried out in Brazil last year. So I look forward to hearing some of the questions you ask in either Portuguese or English, and perhaps we can take the discussion further. I conclude with some of the references that we've been building up in our research.
Thank you very much, Marilyn. I think that's a really interesting account of the practice of policy rather than the theory of policy. Yeah. Telma, over to you. You're going to talk about something called ELF, and I don't know whether you might like to explain to some people what exactly this ELF stuff is. Yeah, thank you.
I hope we'll have time for that. I'll try to address that briefly. Thank you very much for the invitation to both FAUBAI and the British Council to be here. It's a pleasure to be with my colleagues, sharing some of the insights of our study that was conducted under the UK-Brazil English Collaboration Call that was funded by the British Council and Fundação Araucária. And on behalf of my colleagues, I would like to express our gratitude both for this invitation and the funding that enabled us to carry out the study. The title of the research was English as a Medium of Instruction in Two Brazilian Higher Education Institutions from an English as a Lingua Franca perspective. And that perspective has been informing our research in terms of looking at English not as the language of native speakers with certain expectations about its use, but rather opening up for the possibility of appropriation of English as a language that is adopted by non-native speakers and that is quite flexible in terms of semiotic resources integrated with language. I hope that maybe the question time I can be more clear about this. Okay. The research team involved in this project was composed by Alessia Cogo from Goldsmith, University of London, Michele Ocadri from UEL, and Luciana Calvo from UEM. These UEL and UEM are two state-funded universities, and we were interested in understanding the travelers of this train metaphor. There are only a few travelers actually going on board of this train. And in Brazil, despite the fact that we have many institutions reporting in the survey that they are offering courses in English, we don't know exactly what kind of delivery is that. So we were interested in looking at particular practices and especially understanding the motivations and attitudes of lecturers and administrators in relation to the adoption of EMI. The study was conducted in a very short period of time, and by no way what I'm going to bring here can be journalizable. It's just a first attempt to understand the practicalities of doing EMI in two institutions that have very similar trajectories. In terms of international rankings, we hold very close positions, and we were interested in comparing both institutions and seeing whether there were differences that could explain perhaps the higher adoption of EMI or a more shy, let's say, approach to EMI. It was a qualitative study that had this exploratory nature. So it was, as I said, the first attempt to understand what was going on beyond just the information that we have a certain number of courses offered in English. In order to do that, we did some document analysis, looking at all the documents, institutional documents that refer to language policies. We used questionnaires. We conducted focus groups and individual interviews with lecturers. And in addition to that, we have two validation workshops, one in each institution, to present the initial findings and explore with the participants further understandings of what EMI meant to them. Total of about 100 participants that included administrators in both institutions, postgraduate lecturers, and postgraduate students. Postgraduate lecturers responded questionnaires and were interviewed and participated in focus groups, whereas the postgraduate students were just participating in the focus groups. So in order to bring some brief list of findings, the analysis of the formal policy documents revealed that there were documents approved at a higher level of the institution, especially because at the time, funding from the Idiomas Sem Fronteiras, the Language Without Borders program, required a formal document in order to qualify for funding. And so that was a requirement that was met by both institutions. But those documents were not necessarily known by the community. Actually, there is very little information about these documents available widely to the public. These documents in general endorsed multilingualism, especially the mention to Portuguese as a foreign language as an important strategy for internationalization. But also in one of them, there was explicit acknowledgement of the role of English in internationalization, and in fact mentioned classes in English as part of the policy, the language policy of the institution. In terms of initiatives, the study revealed that EMI is restricted to some disciplines at postgraduate level. Actually, we were looking at postgraduate level because this is where most of the courses are taught. And in our case, the courses were taught mainly in life sciences. And compared to the number of courses offered at the university, these were very, very small numbers. And actually, these courses are optional. They are not compulsory, and students take them according to their interests. Most of these practices are a response to external funding, which brings the question of to what extent funding plays an important role in language policies in Brazilian universities at the moment. Especially the CAPES assessment scheme, and many lecturers refer to the reasons for introducing EMI linked to the assessment by CAPES. They understood that this was a requirement and a necessity if they are at the postgraduate level. But those practices were also coherent with their experiences abroad, especially those who had their PhDs in other countries, and they experienced English as a lingua franca, and that supported a lot of the initiatives that they had and the practices, the classroom practices. Also, their beliefs about English and the language ideologies that they held in relation to the language. And also there was the tension between English only or English as a lingua franca as part of their discussions. Some lecturers believe that EMI is English only classes, whereas others believe that you can use Portuguese and you can use other semiotic resources as part of your attempt to socialize the students into academic cultures. In terms of the administration, there was no, in one institution, there was no specific institutional support, although there are short training courses in EMI for lecturers, offered mainly by language departments or external projects, externally funded projects. In one institution, the International Relations Office interacted more intensively with the language departments in order to promote these activities. But what we identified is the very loose connection between what's being done by these projects, especially, for instance, Paraná Fala Inglês or Idiomas Sem Fronteiras, and the international relations offices. And very little knowledge about how EMI is being delivered or what's being done at institutional level. The administration was not capturing this information, so it was very hard for us, for instance, to get access to who was doing EMI and to locate them. I am aware of the time, so I'll go very briefly about the motivations and attitudes. Just to summarize, there is a sense that English, being in charge of EMI courses, would help students to socialize into academic cultures and prepare them for experiences either in Brazil or abroad, and also develop language proficiency. There is this idea that because you're doing this in English, that will help students develop their English as well and reduce fears of using the language. It can also attract international students and create the sort of environment that's needed in order to have more collaboration abroad. In terms of implication for language policymaking, again, it's just a very few mentions here. We believe that our insights lead to the need to demystify EMI as token for internationalization. No way EMI can be considered synonymous with internationalization and English-only classes. So there has to be a better understanding of what is involved in EMI and what kind of conditions are necessary to implement that and support those initiatives. To develop then the broad understanding of EMI and its relevance for academic communication. That is, not seeing EMI as a solution for everything or as a sign that the university is now international because some courses are being offered in English. Also, there is the need to better support bottom-up initiatives because most of these initiatives are bottom-up, not necessarily created by the administration, with consideration of potential positive and negative consequences for teaching and learning. There are concerns about the students who are being left out because courses are being taught in English, and also affecting the self-esteem of colleagues who are not able to do it and creating a sort of hierarchical relationships in the departments. Also to provide, as Marilyn said, tailor-made support. The idea that there is only one EMI policy for the institution doesn't seem to work. We need to think of more specific, contextualized support for those who are interested and who can see benefits of doing that. Also, the need to frame EMI within other languages for internationalization and not a panacea, of course, and that includes Portuguese as a foreign language and the ELF approach, which is a more relaxed way of thinking about English because many lecturers do not try to bring more English into their classes because they believe they have to have the perfect English, otherwise they can't do it. And so the ELF approach provides spaces to understand how English can help construct meaning and develop knowledge without necessarily following the standards or paying too much attention to the form of the language. Also, there was a suggestion that we need to create a community of EMI practitioners and researchers that would allow them to share their views, experiences, findings, and practices. So this community building is an important aspect of the policy, because if EMI is happening at the bottom up, at grassroots level, it's important to create spaces for those who are doing it to share what their experiences are, what they're learning from this experience, and what kind of suggestions they can make for a more formal policy to move it forward. Also think of planning the EMI expansion within the institutional mission. And that means not doing it just because everybody's doing it, but also thinking very carefully what the conditions are, what kind of English is available, who can participate, who's being excluded, and what purposes does EMI serve in terms of the institutional mission. So these are some of the basic implications that we identified, and I'll be glad to answer questions and continue the conversation with those of you who would like to know more about the study. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Telma. These, I call them small-scale studies, but studies focused on 2 universities seem to me to be very revealing. You get a lot more sort of granularity and detail than you do from bigger studies. I'd like to now mention a publication that my British Council Brazil colleagues have put together. I think we have a slide of the title page to show. And indeed, you'll find both Telma's work and Marilyn's work represented in here. It's 8 different studies looking at English language applied research, how it functions in Brazil, and they're all collaborative pieces of work by Brazilian and UK teams. I think we're going to be able to put a link in the chat. If Cynthia's listening to me, I think that would be a good thing if we could have a link that people could download this publication from. It's an attractive, readable publication, short accounts, lots of fun. Yeah. We now have a little bit of a time challenge, because I understand that we should be finishing in 10 minutes time. And I'd like perhaps to make things, to move things on a little bit more quickly. If I could ask the panelists to please switch on their cameras. And I'll start things off with a question for everyone, and you can sort of fight over who answers it first. I mean, our audience today, my understanding is, are people that work in the international relations offices of Brazilian universities. And what I'd like to ask you is, what do you think is the first priority for an international relations office in a Brazilian university in this context of language policy, internationalization, but not Englishization? What is the thing that should be done first? Kyria, you're smiling. You must have an answer, yes?
That is a very important, but at the same time, difficult question. Right, because it depends on the context. Like I said, there is no one-fits-all model that can be adopted, but I would say that the most important, or the first step, is to know the challenges and the context in which the institution is. Very often, and I know this because I've worked for, I worked at the international office for more than 8 years. Very often, the international people think that the international relations office, they have access and they have all the information about international students, language courses, what is going on in the institution. But most international relation offices don't have this information, or at least don't have this information in a systematized way. So I think the first and very challenging task is to gather and systematize this data, this information, so that by knowing itself, the institution can make informed decisions as to what are the challenges, what are the most important steps, and how it can be accountable for in aiming for these steps.
Thank you. So better data. Telma, you switched your mic on, yeah?
Yeah, I think it's important to create a forum where language specialists and international relations people can interact and make decisions and reflect together on what kind of policies would be more convenient for the institution, that would meet their expectations, and design a plan of action. Because at the moment, it seems that there are things going on, but nobody is necessarily trying to coordinate the efforts and create synergies that would help everybody in their purposes. So I guess this would be one way.
Marilyn, anything to add? Marilyn, yeah?
Well, I would argue for similar kind of strategy, perhaps adding funding for high quality doctoral research within the institution, to try to, along the sort of lines that we were pursuing. That would make it so much easier to understand what is happening on the ground in different parts of the university, and to highlight the very specific, to provide contextualized information, as my colleagues put it. And
sorry, go on.
And to illuminate, provide some granularity, as you put it, which is rather nicely chosen word. You need really to kind of probe down to the detail, and the only way you can do that is by working ethnographically, hearing the voices of the actual participants in different disciplines, and getting a sense of what their stance is on various options.
Thank you. Anne, anything do you want to disagree? I suspect you don't, I don't know.
Oh, I think Telma and Kyria and Marilyn have said it all. I think the key is building that evidence base, responding, using that evidence base. So not just having it there, but responding to it, actively responding to it, and collaboration, as Telma said as well, is key.
And one more from me. There's a couple in the Q&A that we'll come to. I mean, let me be a little bit cynical and provocative. This last year, I've seen a lot of English medium education in universities around the world. A huge amount is driven by economics. It's a way of making money. But that wasn't where this all started in terms of internationalization. I mean, how do we get rectors to step back and listen and say, this cannot just be all about international fee-paying students? Kyria?
With all respect to different situations, and of course I'm biased because I come, and most of my experiences in a public university in Brazil. And for those who are not very familiar with this, public universities in Brazil, they're completely free of charge, which might be different to public universities in other contexts. But I think that though some or most universities, like you said, Roy, started this internationalization process and the offer of EMI classes as a way to compensate for mingling financial resources coming from government and state to finance higher education in the form of attracting more international students and, of course, fees. I would say that Brazilian higher education institutions, especially the public ones, I think they started the process, for the good reasons, because there was no economic, at least in the beginning, there was no economic motivation involved. Of course, it is not only a bed of rose story of further internationalization. And as calls like CapSprint that our colleagues mentioned and other calls started to appear, favoring the offer of EMI and the offer of English. Of course, institutions saw the economic motivation for this call, but I would say that at least in Brazil, the offer of EMI classes and classes in other languages and internationalization, at least in the beginning, was not completely economically motivated. And perhaps we can, I mean, for other institutions thinking about this, you know, focus on multilingualism and other kinds of relations, not only with very well-ranked universities, but also universities that are not so well-ranked, I think is a possibility for collaboration, which is in the end, you know, what internationalization should be about. It should be a means to an end and not an end to a means.
Absolutely. Yeah. Other thoughts from people?
Yeah, I think there is a myth that because you're teaching in English, you will attract international students. And in fact, if you look at the number, the profile of the international students in Brazil at the moment, you will see that most of them come from Latin American countries or Portuguese-speaking countries, which means that it is a myth that you're attracting it in that sense, and also in the sense that you don't do anything else to attract more international students, especially at the postgraduate level. So if you have, as our programs do here, we have a selection process. You apply for a PhD, for instance, and you have to go through a series of steps. If this is not announced abroad to English-speaking potential students, in fact, what you're doing is not really for attracting international students, because it's just an isolated activity. And I think it has some connection with money in the sense that most of the pressure to introduce English taught courses would come from funding agencies. From the funding agencies are saying, unless you teach in English, you won't get this kind of assessment. You won't have a good grade, for instance. And so funding is fundamental to understand the kind of policies that we are having in our universities.
That's true in a number of countries where if you teach your courses in English, you get extra budget from the ministry. It doesn't matter how well you teach them in English, but just do them in English. Marilyn or Anne, anything to add to this one?
I think my Brazilian colleagues have covered most of the issues. There's one small space in which we can operate more and more is online, which is very encouraging. I was very excited to hear about the collaboration between my Brazilian colleagues and colleagues in other countries using online facilities, a kind of COIL style. I think that will continue to be a way forward, and it'll get around this really difficult problem of access to knowledge resources. I mean, it's extraordinary that nearly all Brazilian journals are open access, whereas international journals are not. It's just so, as we can see that young people are becoming more familiar with spaces where things are more and more open access, and this is quite encouraging.
And you don't want to tell me off for exaggerating, do you? No.
No, I've got quite controversial views on this, as you know. I think if you explore the benefits of having a balanced language policy, there is economic benefits to having a balanced language policy, not just driving English. I think if you can show those benefits, there's a lot of assumptions made about English and about English medium in particular. And I think there's research to be done to show that a balanced multilingual language policy has economic benefits as well.
Thank you. There was a question in the Q&A that I was going to ask you, but it's disappeared, which I guess means somebody's answered it in the meantime. I mean, there's one here for you, Telma, specifically from Clarissa. How representative of other universities, presumably other universities in Brazil, do you think the two universities you looked at are?
Well, these are two medium-sized universities funded by the state of Paraná. In that sense, they are not like the federal universities in the country that were, for instance, selected for the Cap Spring program and have more competitive, I guess, internationalization plans. But I would say it is representative of medium-sized, publicly funded universities. Although our interest was not in generalizing in any way the data, because even within our institution, we didn't collect data enough to be able to make grand statements about what's going on. It's just gave us a window into what's going on. And we definitely need more research to understand the challenges and the opportunities that are being created by the language policies at work.
So you have your foot in the door. Yeah. Take it further. Yeah. One here from Clarissa. She says, does the panel think that administrative and academic staff usually have similar views on the role of English and which English on the internationalization process? So administrative and academic staff, do they share a vision for English?
I can only speak for my experience and for UFIS, and I would say no. In our case, not sure how representative this would be of other situations.
Tell us a little bit about those differences. What's the difference there?
I think that academics, especially language academics, they have more awareness about the implications of using one language or the other, and about selecting one policy or the other, whereas administrative staff and people who are not academic, just have the role as staff, usually are not as aware of the implications. But then again, since most international offices also are formed by academics, I'm not sure how representative this would be of other institutions.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of clue actually being done, because lecturers have been feeling the pressure or the responsibility of teaching about the language as well. And most of the courses that are being offered to lecturers who are interested in introducing EMI are courses given by language specialists who bring the language techniques, language teaching techniques, to help them think about their classes. So it's, the kind of training that is being offered is mainly in terms of more student-centered methodologies and more language-related teaching.
I think we should be probably winding up. I don't quite know. We're 5 minutes over. I don't know whether in Brazil you might happily go 90 minutes over, but I think I'd like to say thank you very much to all the speakers and participants. And Carol is going to share again her screen to make sure that we get the message about the 4th webinar, which will be on December the 9th, I think. And I have to say, I don't quite understand the extension bit there. Does anybody on the panel, can they tell me what extension means? Kyria, go on.
For outreach.
Yeah, outreach, yeah.
The 3 functions of university: education, teaching, research, and outreach.
Right.
Yeah.
But you call it extension to confuse me. Yes.
Yeah, in Brazil, we usually refer to services and outreach as extension, extensão. Yeah.
Thank
you.
In Portuguese. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's on December the 9th. Yeah. And I also need to tell you that if you want a certificate, and I think some people have asked about this, you need to make sure that you indicate this in the last question in the survey, which I think is a way of tricking you into doing the survey, but probably quite a legitimate way of doing it. So do the survey, and the last question, I think you get the chance to say, yes, please, I'd like a certificate. I'd like to thank all our panelists. Thank you very much for very interesting presentations. It's made it very clear that there is a huge amount more work to be done here. We sort of begin to know what we don't know. But I think particularly those micro studies of 2 universities, very, very interesting, very interesting. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye for now. Bye for now. Bye.